Merphy Napier, one of the big two of fantasy booktube. The dynamic duo of Daniel Green and Merphy Napier have ruled fantasy booktube with an iron fist, it's fair to say. Merphy is someone that, when I look at them, I think, kind of remind me of my mum. On the surface, to every person they meet in public, nothing but delightful. A real, pure soul. But if you know them, there's a little bit of, you can see the darkness behind the eyes. You can see that sometimes there'll just be a couple of sentences. And I see that, Merphy. I read you loud and clear. Merphy is, of course, someone I've watched for years and have read a lot of books at her behest, at her recommendation. But I have also, inadvertently, the person that I've read most of their recommendations based on being bullied by my partner. Grace has got me to read almost all of Merphy's favourites, even if I wasn't interested, because it's a line of causality. It begins with Merphy recommends a book, Grace watches the video, needs to read the book, reads the book, tells me to read it, and then there's no getting out of it at that point. I'm doomed. And that was one thing when I messaged Merphy, when she replied, she gave a list of books that she loves, but that unfortunately I had already read. So, for instance, The Lies of Lochlamora, read it. Guards and Discworld, read it. Live Ship Traders, read it. Rage of Dragons, read it. The Blade itself, read it. Final Empire, read it. There was a lot. Kindred by Octavia Butler. Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. There were so many books that I had already read. So, you can go back and watch any of those because they are favourites. And I've already talked about them on the channel and enjoyed all of them. So we're actually going to get into the ones that I hadn't read. To begin with, as always, I have to thank Merphy wholeheartedly, firstly for actually replying to the email, in terms of, it's one of the great things about BookTube is that there is a real sense of actual community, that people do just reply when they really don't have to, so I 100% appreciate that. And also for the fact that overwhelmingly short books that I could choose from. There was a couple of real short ones and I leaped on them with all my heart because I'm coming up to deadlines for uni and I need a couple of short good boys. As always, if you do like, please do like and please do subscribe, and thank you to my patrons for your continued support. It means the world. First choice is a book that I have actually started to read. I read it back in 2020 when I first started reading again. And I DNF'd it. It's not even a long book. I picked it up, I read half of it, and then I put it down, and then, I don't know, a wormhole opened and ate it or something, but I just never picked it up again. Don't worry. It looks like a massive chunky one. This is a trilogy in the part of 5. So there's 5 books in here. So I'm only reading the first one. Nice bit of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. This is quintessential sci-fi, quintessential comedy. It is a must-read, and I have been meaning to pick it up for a long time after picking it up that first time. I don't know. I think it's because I had read half of it. I'm like, do I want to go back? But now that 3 years have gone by, I don't remember really what happened, so I'm ready to go back in. Hitchhikers is where we get caught up with this guy where one Thursday he's at the pub, I think, and he comes out and he finds out that Earth is being demolished to make way for basically like a hyperspatial express route. So it's being destroyed for a motorway, and Arthur Dent gets wrapped up in it. So it really sets the foundation for being comedy. And I'm not going to say any more because it is short. I'm just going to get into it and we'll see what I think. Well, we're one book down and we are off to a hell of a start. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I feel like it was possibly the safest 5-star that anyone ever could have given me. This has some of the funniest moments in any book I've ever read. I laughed out loud so often. It's impossible to give the plot in actually what the book is, because it's only 120 pages long. So if you start explaining the plot, suddenly you've explained the whole thing. So possibly the easiest way to say is that we're following Arthur Dent, and I think this says it on the... Yeah, I explained this, I think, originally, that Earth is being destroyed for a hyperspatial highway, and hijinks ensue pretty much. From instant one, it is just non-stop hilarity. And so I feel like there's not really, no one needs to hear me say that Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is just very funny, if you get what I mean, in the sense of, what does that mean? There are no qualifiers. I don't want to read any of the jokes to you because it removes the surprise of reading it. And so it's subjective. If you feel like you have similar reading tastes and similar humour to me, then that's all I can say. The natural compliment to make is in regards to the relationship between Hitchhikers and Discworld, both comedic, both kind of did similar things for different genres. If you've read any Discworld, which if you've watched my channel, you very much well should have, I would say that the difference would be that Douglas Adams is a lot more abstract in his humour. He uses a lot of metaphors and sci-fi devices that create very abstract jokes, and they are almost farcical in their borderline stupidity, whilst being extremely clever jokes. They are so clever that they are telling dumb shit, and I love that so much. So I would say the big difference is that Pratchett is much more grounded usually in his humour. He does have some abstract humour, but this is much more, I don't know, sometimes a joke can be delayed and it can hit you at a different time, and depending on when you click with the joke, because it's such abstract storytelling sometimes that I've said abstract so often that the word has lost all meaning, but that is how I feel. So that's pretty much all I can say, because it's just perfect. Like, the ending of this book, there is a scene that I was crying laughing. I was, for those that aren't aware, sometimes if my housemate is playing a game, I read books out loud, and we do it like that. And I was crying laughing reading a scene at the end of this book, and he was laughing as well. We were both physically crying at how funny the ending of this book is. It's only 120 pages long. Like, seriously, it packs such a punch. It's a perfect palate cleanser. Everyone should read it. I don't think it will be perfection for everyone, because, as I said, the humour is sometimes so separated from reality that it's hard to comprehend some of the devices used. However, it was real good. I do plan on continuing with them. I think after reading the City Watch series, I needed a bit of time away from Pratchett, and I think these will be the perfect replacement. We're going on to book 2, so see you in a second. Book 2 was, without a doubt, as soon as I saw the name, I knew that I had to pick it, because if you've watched a Merphy Napier video, other than Lies of Loch Lamora, I feel like next up is Frederick Bachman. If Frederick Bachman doesn't appear in a Merphy Napier Best Books video, then it's just not the right video. I have read 2 Bachman before. I read A Man Called Ove, which I won't go into too much. I do have a review that I don't remember what I said, but the more I think about it, the more lukewarm I am on that book. And so I didn't think Bachman was for me. As I've mentioned previously, via circumventing around Grace bullied me into reading Beartown. It's actually what I read for her favourite book video. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. So, we're in a very interesting spot going into this one. And every morning the way gets... fuck it. If you put more than, 5 words into a title, I'm going to fuck it up. I reject a title this long, I have to admit. And every morning the way gets... This book is one that I've been interested in. I think Grace already owns it. It's nice and short. Once again, I can take this to uni and people are going to be like, bruh, this guy has such emotions. So I'm going to look real cool. There's real nice illustrations in this. Okay, that's very cute, to be fair. Grandpa and Noah are sitting on a bench in a square that keeps getting smaller every day. The square is strange but also familiar, full of the odds and ends that have made up their lives. Grandpa's work desk, the stuffed dragon that Grandpa once gave to Noah, the sweet-smelling hyacinths that Grandma loved to grow in her garden. As they wait together on the bench, they tell jokes and discuss their shared love of mathematics. Grandpa recalls what it was like to fall in love with his wife, what it was like to lose her. She's as real to him now as the first day he met her, but he dreads the day when he won't remember her. Sometimes Grandpa sits on the bench next to Ted, Noah's father. Ted, who never liked maths, prefers writing and playing the guitar, and has waited his entire life for his father to have time for him, to accept him. But in their love of Noah, they have found a common bond. Grandpa, Grandma, Ted and Noah all meet here in this peculiar space that is growing dimmer and more confusing all the time. And here is where they will learn to say goodbye, the scent of hyacinths in the air with nothing to fear. Yes, so evidently the idea of the square growing smaller and dimmer is the idea that the grandpa has, I believe, possibly dementia or Alzheimer's, I don't remember. And so each day it's a metaphor for the fact that he's losing his memory and eventually he'll lose them. So I'm anticipating to cry. Preparing myself. I will put myself in the mental framework to be able to read this and not capitulate into a ball of tears. Talk about absolute fucking whiplash. And Every Morning, The Way Home Gets Longer and Longer by Frederick Backman is very, very good. It was, like I said, it was emotional whiplash from the happy-go-lucky, chill person that I was after finishing Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. You know, really coasting on good vibes. And then I'm sat there, and I started reading this at university. I was sat in a cafe like this, looking very cool and mysterious. And then I hit about 20 pages in, and I had to put it away because I thought, I'm not crying in public today. That's not where I am. I don't want to be that person. I'm not crying in public today. So I came home, and I read this all in a day. You can read it in a sitting. I very much would have if I wasn't at university. Because it is a novella, it's not throwing any curveballs at you. The way it describes it in the beginning is very, very much the case. This is classic Backman to me. This is a Backman that is quintessentially there to make you feel... I think I described this actually as, in my review, it was that it left me broken and yet strangely fixed at the same time, and that's kind of how Backman works. The relationships are the core of this book, and they work very well and are extremely impactful given the amount of time you have with them. This is only 76 pages, and that includes pages that have no text on them at all and just pretty pictures. And let me tell you, they're pretty pictures. But that's a whole page at this 76-page book. That's crazy. There's an intro from Backman where he very clearly tells that this is a rumination that he was personally going through, and as a result he wrote this to himself to kind of think through his process and what was happening in his life. You can tell that. You can really tell that this is fueled by... You can actually really tell that there are elements of... So if you've read Man Called Ove, which I famously wasn't completely on board with, a Man Called Ove, similar style character at certain points, and you can kind of... The more you read, the more you're like, oh, okay, so Backman was very... This is very clearly drawing from, like, real-life people. That kind of archetypal character is reoccurring through his books because he's reflecting on that person in his life and how they impacted it themselves. You kind of share the grief they're going through, even though they're never mentioned in the book at all. I do think there are a couple of Backmanisms for me, which is where Backman gets a little too involved in his writing, in the sense that he builds up and he's like, you can tell that he's written a sentence just to punch you in the fucking heart hole. No other reason. And however, that needs to be there in this because of the short length, that you need to hit those points to really deliver what's happening. So I will forgive my man for that. This is... I gave it 4.25 stars on Storygraph or whatever, 4 stars on Goodreads. I just felt it was very good throughout the entire thing. Between Grace and Merphy, you've completed a character arc in my life of the redemption of Frederick Backman and the my changing of opinion. So I appreciate that. Let's go on to the third book. And then the final book is the posthumous... Oh, wait, oh no, sorry, I have to pronounce it like Merphy. The posthumous Memoirs of Brascabass. I don't know whether that's how you pronounce it. So this could all be embarrassing. This is the 1881 novel, which is told from the perspective of a kind of aristocratic ghost who is telling his memoirs, and it's told in like super brief vignettes that are comedic. It's like a satire, dark comedy, and it just, it tells his failed romances, half-hearted political ambitions, serves up harebrained philosophies, and complains with gusto from the depths of his grave. I saw that, I remember when I watched the review for Merphy that it's dedicated to the worm that gnaws at his cold flesh, because no one alive was worth dedicating it to, which is already hilarious. So I as soon as I saw this on the list, this is one that's for me. No matter what was on that list, even if it was the most Merphy book that's ever existed, this one is just so interesting to me that it would have been on here no matter what. I will be back with you shortly when I finish this bad boy. Well, we've had what can only be described as a thematically roundabout story. I think this is slightly tilted. We've had a thematically enriching experience. I'm going to explain that because it's a very vague sentence. As you've seen, finish Hitchhikers, on top of the world. Second book, push me back down to earth with its sadness. This book settled nicely in the middle, where the Posthumous Memoirs of Brascabas is an odd little duck. Because it's simultaneously very funny, it has a lot of satire, it made me chuckle at various points. However, it's a rather sombre piece as well. It's rather sombre, that's how I'd describe it. There are really, what I found, quite affecting parts in it, in terms of death and the passing of others and his experience and his thoughts, that genuinely I was like, man, I wasn't expecting this. I wasn't expecting some parts to be completely morose and have no comedy, in my opinion. I don't know why I was expecting a bit more of a in-your-face comedy, but instead it's a rather sombre, dark comedy that works extremely well. I just don't think I was anticipating it for some reason. It's on me, but so instead, I enjoyed Brascabas a lot. I think I took a lot away from it. It was very interesting in terms of thinking about it when it was released. One very interesting part is the actual time frame in which it takes place. Imperial Brazil. And that is not a period of time or a place that I have read a lot about. And the way it dealt with slavery and the fact that it's still going on, the reflections on colonialisation and relations with Britain, etc. It was education at the same time as being morose satire that was interesting. And it's... I value it for in the sense of learning about that period that I had not read about in any depth whatsoever beforehand. I want to rein in expectations of the comedy. In fact, I would struggle to recommend this to a lot of people, because this is a book that is fucking intertextually rife. It is referencing so much biblical, mythological, contemporary. It is constantly the same way that we do now. If we're making references, we're referring to all kinds of different pop culture references or story references, intertextual threads that tie everything together. This book is rich in them. Luckily, 2 years ago, I'd have been lost. I would have thrown this book out the window because I wouldn't have understood a word. Luckily, a lot of the stories now came together for me where I was like, okay, I know what that is, I know what he's referring to. However, if you don't have that experience, if you aren't well read in myths or biblical stories or just a lot of things, you're going to have to read a lot of footnotes, and the footnotes quite often explain humour in some cases, which, as we all know, the last thing you want is for someone to explain the joke. It's never funny at that point. I would warn you off it if that's not your vibe. If that's not who you are, stay away. You want a morose, character-driven, dark satire that is kind of commenting on philosophy and death and the pointlessness of life and relationships and the love that's shared, and is being pessimistic, optimistic, is flying through all these different things. It's It's doing a lot. The book is really doing a lot. I really enjoyed it. It's a fast-paced read, but it's also very slow at the same time. Because of the short chapters, it's like 1-2 page. You feel a sense of momentum that you want to take, but it's so intertextually dense, and the writing is in such a way that you slow down. I do think that should I say Mercado de Asis, the actual author is an incredibly good writer. There is a charm to the Brascobas that you find enthralling. At least I did. I was hanging on his words and what was being said. I found it difficult to put down when I was reading it, and I struggled to pick it back up when I wasn't. That's how I describe it, that once you take that first step, once again, this falls into the same thing. I've tried to explain what the humour is vaguely in terms of what it's referring to, because as always, explaining a joke is not fun. Telling someone something is or isn't funny has no value because it's subjective, in my opinion. So if that sounds like you could find humour in what is quite sombre satire, then it's for you. If you want bombastic, there's some in it for you, but quite often I found myself quite reflective, which was odd. I wasn't anticipating it. So I would say that we're at the end here. We have read 3 books thanks to Merphy Napier, and I thoroughly enjoyed every single one. A new favourite, a continuation of a redemption arc in Bachman, and a thoroughly enriching read through, and something that I've desperately wanted to read more of, which is classics that are from different cultures. And so overall, this has been a wonderful experience. Thank you very much, Merphy, for recommending the books. If you did please do subscribe. And thank you to my patrons one final time. And then all that's left to say is, as always, have a nice rest of your day.